thank you that you all were willing to join us. And I can say, dear friends, because I think for many, many years, we have not been living in such existential times as we do now. And the world has been shaken around, but that Europe could be shaken around like we are experiencing it now is something which I think most of us did not think would be possible in such a short time. Taking us in Germany, there is always a big reluctance looking at situations of war. You know that my generation thought it would be the best answer to say never war again. And it was the war in Bosnia which told us that this is only half of the consequences which we have to draw from our history in Germany, which is Nazism and the Third Reich and the unbelievable crimes that have been committed. That there is a second part, never war again, but protect the victims. And we went quite some way during Bosnia. We waited long until 8,000 young men were handed over from UN blue helmet soldiers to their murderers. And this was the point when pushing reality aside did not work anymore. And we started acting. In that case, it was NATO starting acting. I would say that if we look at this huge war against Ukraine now, at least in Germany, again, you have this unwillingness to see. We did not want to see that Russia has been fighting a war against Ukraine constantly for 8 years. We did not want to see the obvious preparations for a new offensive, which started a year ago and were very obvious last October. And the American administration even told us there will be a Russian offensive. And still in January 27th, when in the German parliament, we always celebrate the day of the liberation of Auschwitz, there was a debate on Ukraine, and our parliamentarians and government said, no weapons to Ukraine, which means that we actually were sticking to this never war again, not debating how the protection of the population of a country which has not been aggressive towards Russia, how our obligations are. On this background of unwillingness to see, this has changed, but today I want you to help us debating the lines which we have between war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide, and not according to a general feeling of how many people have been killed or how bad are the crimes being committed, but really on the background of the question, what does international law say? And to be honest, for me, the question about genocide or a possible genocide is the most important, because I think, at least in Germany, but also in other countries, it was push the awareness that being too slow and too little creates a huge responsibility. And I will be very outspoken. My personal feeling is that my generation, our government, our parliamentarians are at the moment facing a genocide right under our eyes within Europe, which I think will turn out to be the biggest one after 1945. This is what we are going to talk about today. I think it will not be the first and the last time. May I please introduce to you those friends who are going to help us go along those questions. John Herbst has not joined us yet. I will still introduce him. I think you all know him. He has been ambassador in Kiev, Ukraine, American ambassador for many years, and is now working with the Atlantic Council, and I think is one of the main drivers in the think tank community in Washington to push any government, which was the Trump administration and now is the Biden administration, a deep friend of Ukraine. Then we have Professor Christian Tomuschat. Very good to see you, Mr. Tomuschat. How good that we all learned to work together online and COVID taught us those facilities. Professor Tomuschat has a long list of honorable jobs he has been having. He is a law professor, has been a law professor in Berlin, and he is a former member of the UN Commission on International Law and on the UN Rights Committee. So who could be more suitable to go along this question of what this convention and those different conventions, international law, tells us. Hello, John. Good to see you. You were already introduced, so you missed that. But I talked only good about you. Okay. Then we have, I see to the right, Wayne Jordash. He is a lawyer and belongs to the Global Rights Compliance. He now is in Kiev, helping the government to document all the atrocities which are being made, and we also know each other since many years. I think women very often are being introduced by which husband they have. So may I turn it around? Wayne Jordash is the husband of Svetlana Zalichuk, who we all know. And then we have Professor Alexander Merezhko. He also is a professor of law, so he has, from being a professor of law, changed to being a lawmaker now in the Rada. He's the speaker of the Foreign Committee. We also have met in better times, but of course, he was a Fulbright scholar, so of course, he also is one who will give us an estimation on what we are dealing with. War crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. Chatham House now has started a memorandum calling it a war of aggression. I think we should not deal with that term today. I think it's really good if we stick to those three terms and maybe start declining and going our way through those three different terms. And maybe Professor Tomuschat, since you have been working on that issue together with Professor Luchterhand, who is a German law professor also, maybe you will help us going along those three terms and the international law, which is beyond it, or which is the basis for the facts which we have together.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start with genocide, because genocide is a crime which has been laid down in the 1948 Convention against Genocide, adopted by the United Nations. And this convention has been ratified by almost all states of the world. Russia and Ukrainian Republic also members, states parties of the Genocide Convention. And it is very clear, according to this convention, that genocide is an international crime to be prosecuted everywhere. And it entails universal jurisdiction for every well, judicial authority everywhere in the world. There's no need for a special connection with the crime of genocide. This is very important. It is not controversial. It is a stable pillar of the international system of criminal jurisdiction, genocide, which is, of course, the most horrendous crime of all. We have all the lists then afterwards of war crimes and crimes against humanity. War crimes in particular have been specified in additional protocol 1 to the 1949 Geneva Conventions on Humanitarian Law. And this protocol number 1 of 1977 has also a great advantage because it has been ratified by Russia, at that time the Soviet Union, and Ukraine. And it is very, very clear that the crimes listed there are applicable to every state party, and every state party has to respect those lists of war crimes, among which, of course, the most prominent one is no killing of civilians in wartime, in armed conflict. Armed conflict opens the door to killing, but only among armed forces, and persons who are outside the armed conflict itself should not be targeted, should not be harmed in any manner whatsoever. I think these are the two most central crimes which are relevant currently in the Ukrainian conflict. On the one hand, genocide, the most horrendous crime, but the war crimes also terrible, killing civilians, you know, and there's something which seems to have happened now many times by tens of thousands of people in Ukraine. Maybe the number of 100,000 has already been attained. We don't know it because no side really publicizes its lists of dead people, of losses.
And often they don't know. I think in Mariupol, if we take a place like that, I think there is no knowledge about it.
Yeah, but the number I just read, some numbers in the Guardian about that, the number of dead in Mariupol is estimated at least 10,000. They might be 20,000 because nobody really knows quite a lot about the civilians who had remained in their buildings and cellars and hidden somewhere where they could not be attained. They at least hope not to be attained by the Russian artillery and tanks. And I think the final balance will be terrible.
Okay, thank you. So, Alexander, maybe we go on, and we now have been talking about war crimes, which is totally clear. No killing of civilians. We are seeing that every day due to brave journalists who still go in, and due to the social media, which gives unbelievable possibilities to document what could not be documented 20 or 25 years ago. Now let's go about the next term, crimes against humanity. And I think your country now is starting to speak about genocide also.
Interestingly, we had a meeting online, of course, of our committee recently, just an hour before this meeting. And we have adopted a resolution of the Verkhovna Rada of our parliament addressing all the countries, all the parliaments, international organizations with appeal to recognize Russian crimes against Ukraine as a genocide against Ukrainian people. We have adopted, and maybe even this week it will be, we have adopted at the committee, but now we expect it to be adopted by the Verkhovna Rada itself. And interestingly, it was translated into English. As soon as it will be adopted, I will send it to you because it contains argumentation in favor of genocide. The thing is that as I can see it right now, for instance, Philip Sands, he argues in the following way. He says, I'm ready to recognize that we're dealing with crimes against humanity, but it's not genocide. Because what is, or at best, he says, maybe it's political understanding of genocide, but it's not strictly legal genocide according to convention. So the biggest problem for us is to prove the intent to destroy in whole or in part Ukrainians as a nation. This is the biggest challenge for us right now. And I'm talking here not as a politician, but as a professor of international law. Mm-hmm. By the way, I would like to mention that I'm very honored to participate in such interesting discussion and to see for the first time in my life Professor Tomu, because in the early 90s, when I was a PhD student, I was writing a dissertation on humanitarian intervention and defended my thesis in 1996. And I quoted and read works by Professor Tomu, and I couldn't imagine at the time that the day will come when I'll see him and I'll be able to participate in this interesting discussion. What's the problem with the term intent and how to prove it? This is the biggest challenge. I read a lot about this because I have a finished article on genocide of Chechen people. And I studied, when I worked in India, I studied at that time this phenomenon. The trick is that contemporary politicians, contemporary leaders like Putin, they don't openly say that we want to destroy Ukrainians because they're Ukrainians. They understand that it might cause them lots of problems. They're doing it in different way. That's why we can prove this intent not as much using direct evidence as circumstantial evidence. Well, Putin himself is using euphemisms to commit genocide. He's talking about denazification, for example, or he's talking about that Ukrainians and Russians are the same, are one people. But behind it, if we look at the practice, if we look at Russian propaganda and this way of hatred towards Ukrainians, we see that we are dealing with a genocidal intent. Because to Putin, the enemies are those Ukrainians who want to preserve their Ukrainian identity. He brands them as Banderovits and so on. This is the problem with proven intent of genocide. That's why we need to talk to our colleagues in the West, to try to persuade them. We need to study the cases of genocide in Bucha. I've been recently myself to Bucha and to Irpin, and there are just horrible facts which prove that there is genocide. Thank you.
Okay, Alexander, you named Bucha. We will later on in the next step talk about Mariupol, and I will tell you why. Taking Philip Sands, I remember a long talk with him, before the Ukrainian war, which he had with the Coope Foundation. And there he already claimed that he is not really happy with the term of genocide, and that he thinks that the term crimes against humanity is just as suitable and does not really create a difference in the legal consequences internationally. And I think in Germany, we have a lot of thinking that there is only one genocide in this world, which has been the Shoah, which never has been seen before in a civilized country. And I think there is a difference between law professors like him who say, if you take the term crimes against humanity, it covers the same happenings, and the consequences are the same, and the term genocide has become a trophy in the international communication. And that there has been this has been a trophy. I've seen it very often, the Armenians fighting, the question of the Holodomor, and now the Russians claiming that they had to intervene in Ukraine because there was a genocide being committed towards the Russian people. So you see, it is a very complicated term, and that's, I think that is the reason why we have to be so very careful whether the convention and the international law really is meeting what is happening on the ground. And I would like to turn over to you, John. I don't know whether there's any debate like that. Oh yes, I know. There was an article in the Washington Post just a few days ago, a comment from a Ukrainian Jewish journalist or lawmaker, I don't know anymore. But anyway, how about that debate? And not only the public debate, but the research and the analysis concerning the question of genocide.
I think you were smart, Marie, to line this conversation up to talk about war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Because I think there's no dispute on war crimes for sure, crimes against humanity too, I think. There is some debate on genocide. I think you probably know that Jake Sullivan was kind of interrogated about this on Meet the Press on Sunday, and both he and President Biden have not said this is a genocide. They've said it's certainly a war crime. And of course, Biden excited some controversy when he called Putin a war criminal. But as for genocide, the article you referred to is written by a professor, Eugene Finkel, who said, looking at what the Russians have done, and I think you're right, ground zero for Russian war crimes is Mariupol. It's not Bucha, it's not Borodianka, it's not Irpin, although awful things have occurred there. But ground zero truly is Mariupol. And since Mariupol is under siege, we can't quite see what's happened there, although we have some idea. Finkel says, keeping in mind what they've done, what the Russians have done, and the RIA Novosti articles, where they describe their intention. And they make the truly preposterous claim that denazification has not necessarily anything to do with Nazis. And the Ukrainians are Nazis because they are Ukrainians. And they are Ukrainians who do not submit to Russia and do not take Russia's side. And they need to wipe that out. And the RIA Novosti articles talk about roughly a majority of the Ukrainian population harboring these views, and they need to be subject to either death or slave labor camps. And those who survive need to be subject to re-education camps. So you add all this, and Finkel draws a conclusion. This looks like, it smells like genocide. Now, there's another professor, I believe, at Brown University, his name is Bartov, who's considered a genocide expert. And Bartov originally wrote that he did not think this looks like genocide, not that it could not be genocide, but that you don't have enough evidence yet. But even he has said that given what appeared in RIA Novosti, maybe. He said this may be the turning point on which we come to the conclusion that in fact genocide is taking place.
What if I would argue that RIA Novosti is not a declaration by Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin?
Nope, that's true. But since we know the extent of the control exercised by the Kremlin and by Putin himself over the Russian media, especially over the past 6 or 8 weeks, I think it's not illegitimate to make that claim. And of course, additional evidence for this, although not conclusive evidence, has been the truly outrageous things coming from Putin's mini-me, Dmitry Medvedev. His recent pronouncements on the war in Ukraine and the Ukrainian people is not as flagrant as RIA Novosti, but it's also pretty nasty. He says the very essence of Ukrainianness, fed by anti-Russian venom, lies about its identity and is one big sham. Now that does not go to the measures that RIA Novosti argues need to be taken upon those Ukrainians, but it builds up this, this fantasy of hate, which can justify that. And again, he's one of the most senior figures in the Russian political spectrum. He also says the most important goal is to conquer the bloodthirsty and totally fabricated myth-laden consciousness of some Ukrainians. Now, what does one do to achieve that objective, right? Yeah. I think re-education camps are a rather mild form to treat such a difficult or nasty illness. So I'm hesitant to use the word genocide, but I am very understanding of those who do. And maybe, I'm not a genocide expert, I'm not Lemkin, but let the experts figure it out. There's enough morally depraved activity going on and geopolitically dangerous activity going on for us to react strongly.
Thank you, John. Wayne, what's your view on it, being a lawyer on international law and human rights also, and being in Kiev?
I think the starting point for me, I'm a practitioner, I'm not a professor, is always to analyze the pattern of the crimes. The statements coming out of the Kremlin and the official press agency and the spokespeople for Putin are, of course, important, but they're a fragment of what is necessary to prove genocide in a court of law. And that's where I come from. And what I see, first of all, is that we're at the early stages of gathering evidence. So we don't know everything yet. We only know a fraction of what crimes have been committed. But what I do see in the patterns is an escalation from war crimes at the beginning, which appear to be, and I'm going to keep using the words appear to be because it's not definitive yet, but appear to be designed to coerce the population into agreeing a takeover by Russia. And then an escalation when the population, Ukrainians, clearly didn't want that, an escalation to the use of real force and fairly targeted force. And then an escalation when even that targeted force didn't achieve its aim of persuading, coercing the population to welcome the Russians, to a level of violence which was much more savage and much more destructive in its aims and objectives. So we went from violence which was targeted against civilians, which was certainly designed to achieve a military purpose. That military purpose was to allow a takeover. I wouldn't jump from war crimes to genocide quickly. I would go then to crimes against humanity, where the targeting became a widespread and systematic attack on the civilian population, the basis of crimes against humanity. And I think where we are moving to, and we may have moved to, I don't know, is the type of violence which is designed for no other purpose than to destroy part of the Ukrainian people. So I think that criminal trials of this kind always rely upon piecing together the fragments. No, there's never a smoking gun, if I can put it that way. Even the most blatant comments by the leadership are never enough to, or else genocide trials would be over much more quickly than they are. So I think we can be fairly certain, well, very certain war crimes, very certain crimes against humanity. And I think in the coming weeks, we will be much more clear about whether this persecutory conduct has escalated to a genocidal conduct. Bucha is a valuable piece in the jigsaw. Mariupol will be, but I suspect there'll be many other places which also provide the pieces of jigsaw to enable us to come to that decision.
Thank you, Wayne. Now I will turn back to you, Professor Tomu, because a colleague of yours, Professor Luchterhand, and you have been communicating, and we have been communicating over that issue, told us that it is not talking about genocide against the Ukrainian people in all of Ukraine. What you told us, and I think everybody in Western Europe has learned that since Srebrenica, that the Genocide Convention can meet within a war a certain place. And we had the war against Bosnia, we had many crimes, many war crimes, but then in Srebrenica, this certain place was then by international law and by decision of the court being called a genocide. And you, Professor Tomu and Professor Luchterhand, have been looking at Mariupol and taking the Genocide Convention and then went through it. And maybe you help us, this dedication which brought you to the conclusion that already we can say Mariupol, we have fait accompli, and we don't have to wait for further research or further proofs.
So it is very clear that you cannot speak of genocide generally in Ukraine, because there are many places where people can live currently without great impediments, and the Russians do not proceed everywhere with the same brutality and rigor. But Mariupol has been really the center of repression, of a brutality which is really untold. And well, why is the inference justifiable to call what is happening or what happened in Mariupol genocide? It is first of all the brutality of the attack, where people were shelled and bombed day and night for at least 2 weeks, I think, and it's going on. There's no end to it. The interruption of all infrastructure installations, no water, no food, and no electricity, and so on, everything interrupted deliberately, not accidentally as a by consequence of war, but the essential aim of the Russians was to conquer Mariupol at any cost, at any cost. This is not only the intent to conquer this city, but to destroy those people who still defend Mariupol. Those people are still defending Mariupol. They are Ukrainians. They want to defend Ukraine as a country, and they feel that they're Ukrainian who have a sacred duty to defend their country. And the Russians want at any cost to break that resistance, not because the people they're defending that, because they are Ukrainians. And as it was already said before, Putin denies that there's any real existence of Ukraine and Ukrainians. Actually, he denies them the right to live and according to their wishes, how to want to be, that they want to be Ukrainian, to belong to the Ukrainian nation. And well, those people in Mariupol, originally there were 400,000 people. Now they may be down to 200,000 or even less, no? But this is an important part of the Ukrainian people, a representative part of the Ukrainian people. And they, in a way, represent in this group the essence of the Ukrainian state. And well, Russia wants to do much more than just conquer the city. They want to wipe out all the traces of Ukrainian life. They deny their right to exist, their right to life. And I think this is so gross and so horrendous that, well, one can easily come to the conclusion that this establishes intent to destroy an important part of the Ukrainian people. And in this regard, I'm perfectly in accord with Mr. Luchterhand, who came to that conclusion. And I have some experience with genocide. I was the coordinator of the Truth Commission in Guatemala. We had to face up to the allegation that there had been genocide in wide parts of the country. And then we found that in some places, there genocide had been committed because the intention was so ugly, was so clear against the survival of the people. And I think the same can be found here. Russia wants to destroy Mariupol, not only the city and the buildings, but also the people in the city, because they were not allowed to leave the city, the civilians. And when there was some offer from Russia to take them out, to carry them out, the corridor would have led into Russia, and people would have landed somewhere in Siberia, many thousand kilometers away from Mariupol. Again, this is one of the indicia which point to the commission of genocide. I think it all comes together. You do not need a general plan established by the government, but the intent can be deduced from circumstantial evidence. And I think there's plenty of circumstantial evidence for the intent to destroy Mariupol with the buildings and the people living in that city to make that a Russian city. I think this is clearly established. This clearly establishes an intent to kill and destroy, annihilate one important part of the Ukrainian people.
Thank you, Mr. Tomu. During those times when we have been discussing between your, I would say, courageous attempt to go public with that in Germany, I learned that mainly there is four main aspects we have to talk about. One is the intention to liquidate the state, or to deny that there is the right for a statehood, which I think is not then only linked to RIA Novosti, but to the Russian president himself. We would have to go through that. Number two is deny that there is an identity of a people of its side, which is the identity of a Ukrainian people and not being part of the Russian people. And number three is, Mr. Tomoshat has been talking about it, the intent to kill as many civilians as possible, which is destroying the infrastructure, but which was the attack on the theater. We know that there is clinics that have been, the maternity clinics which have been bombed. And then number four, no way for escape. The Red Cross started over and over to evacuate the city, and they had to turn around again and again. So I would now, now I would go back to you, to all three colleagues from Kiev, Washington, and Kiev again. If we take those four criteria, would that be something, John, that the American, the Parliament, for example, or any other organization would go along with? And like I said, we are talking about Mariupol. We are not talking about all of Ukraine.
I don't think that there's any set opinion on this at the present time in Washington. What there is, especially in Congress, is a great deal of outrage about what Moscow is doing in Ukraine. And it's well understood that Mariupol is the place where the worst things are happening. People are dying not just from shelling, but also from malnutrition, from the absence of medical supplies, all denied by the Kremlin in classic siege warfare. Outrage in Congress is growing. So I could see an approach like this, carefully presented, would attract a great deal of support.
Wayne?
Yeah. Well, looking at the four, the debate within a court case where genocide is alleged is always what was the primary purpose of the violence. So liquidating a state, attacking identity, these are not necessarily, they should be they will be taken into account. They can be evidence of the steps which lead to genocide, but you always are focusing in the end on the primary purpose and whether a physical destruction of the people or part of the people was intended. So a court, an international court, a national court could decide, for example, that there was an attempt by Putin's regime to take over the country, to change the identity of the people, but not necessarily to destroy the people. So there are these distinctions which will always be made in a court case. And if I can go back to something that Christian said, the fact that people were being deported from Mariupol into Russia, in fact, in a court case is likely to be seen as allowing an inference that the Russian army, that Putin didn't want destruction. In fact, what he wanted was the people to turn into Russians, not to destroy the people, but the fact that they were deported. For example, this is the debate in the Rohingya case at the ICJ. The Gambia has taken Myanmar to the ICJ to accusing them of violating the Genocide Convention. And the debate revolves around, did Myanmar, the military, did they, when they deported 600,000 Rohingyas in August of 2017, did they merely intend, I say merely in quotation marks, intend for the people to be deported, or did the deportation foreshadow, or was it intended to destroy the people as well as deport them? So deportation is often an indication that destruction is not actually sought, just the removal of the people. One thing we haven't mentioned, though, I think in this case, and I think Mariupol, but also other places within Ukraine, and this is why I always go back to this. I don't believe that genocide will be established on the basis of examining one incident, even if it's as horrific as Mariupol. And this is one of the reasons why, is because one indication which we haven't mentioned, I think, is the forcible transferring of children from Ukraine. For me, that is one of the most poignant indications of genocide. It is genocide consists of killing, serious bodily or mental harm, forcibly transferring children, impregnating women with another identity's children. And what we have, I think, in Ukraine is indications of genocide, because we have mass killings, we have mass serious harm. And as I understand from the emerging evidence, we have mass forcible transferring of children from Ukraine into Russia. To me, these are much better indications of genocide than, say, the immediate facts of Mariupol.
Alexander.
Actually, this is exactly what I was going to say regarding transferring of children, because as we all know, it's one of the acts of genocide according to the Convention of 1948. And this is exactly what happened. Thousands of children, not only adults, but also children, had been transferred by force to the territory of Ukraine. And today I read a tweet by Timothy Snyder, and he's referring to article about fast-track adoption procedure introduced by Russia. And he's asking the question, isn't it genocide? And very correct question. To me, the horrible symbol of genocide in Mariupol was the bombardment of the theater, where 300 people were hiding, including lots of children. And there was a huge sign, children, in Russian language. And to me, this bombardment, it was not what is known as indiscriminate shelling. It was deliberate. It was very deliberate. And to me, it proves intent to destroy. And one last point. I have noticed interesting thing about Putin's pattern of behavior. Before he commits a crime, he accuses his future victim of intending to do it, what he is going to do. For instance, he said, well, Ukraine is going to invade Ukraine, is going to invade Russia. And then he did it. And the same is true about genocide. Because when he is accusing Ukraine of committing genocide, in reality, he's trying to cover up his own intention to commit genocide. So it's not coincidence.
Thank you. Wayne, may I go back to you? When you say deportation actually is a contradiction to the genocide thesis, because it means people are supposed to survive. But if that also means a Russification, doesn't it mean that forcing people or giving them only one possibility as civilians to leave the country and go into the country of the aggressor, which intends to deny that there is a Ukrainian identity, wiping out an identity by deportation into the country of the aggressor, and then forcing them to be Russians or forcing them into a Russification. For me, it is hard to understand that this is not part of wiping out the identity of a people.
It is definitely part of wiping out the identity of a people, but it's not necessarily an intention to physically destroy part or whole of the population. Lemkin's original idea of genocide involved both the physical destruction of a people, but also the cultural destruction of a people. But the way it's been interpreted since then, especially by the international courts, has been very much a focus on physical destruction. And not only a physical destruction, generally speaking, there's been an over-focus, in my view, on mass killings. So I think there's a movement now within international law to try to see genocide in a broader sense. So for example, instead of just looking at mass killings, looking at rape and what was the intention behind the rape. For example, again, going back to the Rohingyas, the Myanmar military engaged in terrible sexual violence against both men and women. And to understand whether the Myanmar military are responsible for genocide, you have to look at that and ask questions such as, was that sexual violence designed to impregnate the Rohingya women with Myanmar military children? Does that indicate an intent to destroy? But more than that, does the attack on the family unit, which sexual violence represents, also foreshadow the destruction of a family unit and therefore the destruction of the reproductive ability of a people, and therefore indicative of an intent to destroy. But nonetheless, the definition always comes back to the physical destruction, whether an immediate physical destruction by mass killing or a longer term physical destruction by virtue of forcibly transferring children, impregnating women, and so on. So unfortunately, genocide didn't go the way that Lemkin, the originator, wanted, and that's why we're having these debates. But unfortunately, the law is fairly well set that it's physical destruction. I think we need to focus on whether the Kremlin wanted physical destruction. And I think the question of whether there was an attack on the identity is an important step along the way of working out whether that attack was in fact the step towards an intention to physically destroy.
Okay, thank you. I will open it to the question, many questions we have by now, but still I want to go back to one argument and information which you gave. I had been hearing about children, some individuals that were being deported against their will to Russia. Now, Alexander, I heard you say thousands of children. And this is something I have not heard before yet. And Wayne, you said, if this is fact, we definitely get much closer to the genocide identification than we have now. Would you please say a few words about that information, Alexander, because it's breathtaking. I must say that it's breathtaking.
Yes, yes. Actually, I myself was surprised. I read it recently, probably yesterday. I will double check on that, but I definitely read about thousands. So maybe I will try. Maybe it was from coming information from the general office of the prosecutor. Yeah, but I will definitely check because it's not. Okay. It's not like dozens. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So now I will start opening the question.
Hello.
Yeah.
I just.
Professor Tomaschat, yeah, go ahead.
Just a very brief remark. We should not exclusively focus on genocide. I think this is worst of the crime, but there is war crimes and crimes against humanity at the same time. They are bad enough, no? And then maybe the Russians then say, well, they allege that genocide has been committed, but there's no proof of genocide, and therefore it's all not very important. It's very insignificant because there was no genocide. Therefore, all the allegations are without any substance. So we should really have those three elements: war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the third one we should keep it. Genocide. This is possible, but an international tribunal will have to make a determination on that, but we should not forget that crimes against humanity are bad enough, and there should be prosecution of those crimes.
Okay, thank you. So I will start now. A question for Christian Tomaschat and Wayne, please. How much does the lack of international lawyers' knowledge of Eastern Europe and of the history of Russia-Ukraine relations prevent them from seeing a bigger picture of Russia's crimes in Ukraine, including a possible genocidal intent? This goes back to the question, do you know the history, the difficult history, for example, of Holodomor, which we have a debate whether Stalin did not want to wipe out the Ukrainian people already.
No, but I didn't get the question. No,
okay.
What's the point of the question?
Actually, the question is it possible that international lawyers just don't know about the history of those countries between Ukraine and Russia in order to come to the conclusion of genocide? And I just took as an example that Ukrainians have in their historical DNA, the experience of Holodomor, which there is a lot of hints that Stalin deliberately wanted as many Ukrainian people especially in the countryside, to die. That he wanted the country, that he wanted the land without the people.
Oh, I'm pretty sure there are parallels. You can compare it, and but it's very difficult ex post, you know, to characterize certain events as genocide. But what happened in the 30s was so massive, late 20s and early 30s, and also massive. I think that even an observer who cannot really see the facts in concrete or what happened there, we know it from the pages of history, or what happened more or less, not in all and every detail. But I would venture to say that this, what happened in the past, really did amount to genocide. This would have to be confirmed. I would have to study it further. But I think it's the external circumstances which are well known to everyone and have not been deleted from the pages of history, in spite of all the efforts of Russian historians to distort history and to manipulate and falsify history. I think this is something of such tremendous dimension that this amounts to genocide. And I'm afraid to say that much of what the German Wehrmacht, the Nazis, did at that time also amounted to genocide. I'm not going back to that, but the historical debt of Germany is a big one and tremendous one. And one should not forget it, that there was this precedent of the German invasion of Ukraine in 41, and this is something which is, well, a heavy weight on my soul and on my conscience.
Thank you. Anybody else? Wait.
I'd like to. Well, the first thing I would say is that, you know, I've worked at most of the international criminal tribunals, from Rwanda to Cambodia to Sierra Leone. And the one thing that annoys the hell out of me is the I was going to say arrogant, but let me say arrogance of international lawyers who parachute into other countries and fail to read the signs, fail to familiarize themselves with the culture, with the history, and as a consequence, come out with prosecutions and judgments which don't resonate with the local population, which is why I'm a big fan of national and local prosecutions, because there's more of a chance that important historical themes which have led to the current crisis can be taken into account and read into the question of individual criminal responsibility. For sure, what's happened here since 2014 is of huge significance in terms of assessing criminal responsibility. I don't think you could come to a judgment about genocide in this current invasion without understanding how we got here from at least 2014. Again, it's the escalation for me which is of real interest. You know, Putin takes Crimea, he takes the east, he doesn't achieve his political aims. He moves on then to invade the whole country. They don't welcome him with open arms, so he moves on to the next. And so we see the escalatory theme. And I suspect if we look further back to the Holodomor and the relationship between Ukraine and the Soviet Union and Ukraine and Russia, we'll see even more patterns which explain why we are where we are today. And it will enable us to see whether we're talking about crimes against humanity or indeed genocide.
Thank you, Wayne. There is somebody who is Christian Boos. He is working very precisely on Mariupol and has been following the evidence for starting from day number 1. and he is very much investigating in the social media. And he is asking now and turning our awareness to what is happening in the social media by the Kadyrov soldiers, which is the Kadyrov 95, which is a platform, and there the speeches are so full of hate and stimulating the killing of Ukrainians in Mariupol as such, that again there is the question whether we have this in-between of ethnic genocide plus political genocide, or at least genocidal intent. Let's talk a little bit about Kadyrov 95 and his role, which he obviously has in Mariupol. Alexander, do you know about it? I guess, John, you probably know about it, yes?
Interestingly enough, I was given in the morning interview to actually to the Russian-speaking TV channel called Tomu. And I was asked the question. We were talking about Kadyrov and Kadyrovtsi, so his followers. But before I will answer this, I just checked, and the mayor of Mariupol and our ombudswoman, they say that 40,000 people were transferred to Russia, and they also say that parents and children were separated. But we also have more fresh data about this. Going back to Kadyrov and his sort of followers, to me, first of all, to me, he's not a typical representative of the Chechen people. Legally speaking, he is representative of the occupation administration, because Chechen people themselves have been a victim of genocide during the first and during the second so-called Chechen wars. And there is strong resistance against him. Putin is using Chechens for political murders also, as we know. And he's using also Chechens, Kadyrovs to be more exact, he's using to scare people in Ukraine. Maybe it's mostly for propagandistic maybe goals they use. But the thing is that for all the crimes committed by Kadyrovtsi, the responsibility, criminal responsibility, is with Putin himself as a commander-in-chief of this army of war criminals, and as a major war criminal himself.
John, do you share that view?
I think Alexander's touched all the main points. Putin is responsible for using them. They're used both to inspire fear, but also the things they do, the abominable things they do fit clearly as war crimes. I would hesitate to draw genocide from that, except in a much broader context.
Okay, and I think what we have to talk about, especially being in Germany, the German government for a long time has been eager to talk about Putin's war. And it was very interesting that within our team, it was the Russian team members who said, you better stop talking about Putin's war, because nobody is being forced to rape a woman or to shoot at civilians. So please take those people responsibility also who are Russian citizens or Russian soldiers are committing those crimes. And I think this is the same, of course, for Kadyrovskis. Nobody forces the Kadyrovskis to go to Ukraine and kill and rape there. And like the Wagner group were not being forced to go to other countries of this world and to go to the Donbass and to Ukraine. So I think this is something, a debate which we, especially in Germany, maybe not that much within the United States, have to have also, because there is more responsibility than to Putin only. And us being German, we know what we are talking about. Yeah.
Well, I think if I can jump in there, I think it's really right to see this. If this is a genocide, or if this is crimes against humanity, this is not. Putin will ultimately bear the greatest responsibility, but the foot soldiers, the generals, the financiers, all of them. You don't have to be high-ranking to be responsible for genocide. You can be a local town mayor. You can be a captain in the army. This is not. We should be careful not to just focus in on on Putin. And the way you build a case to demonstrate crimes against humanity or genocide is you start at the bottom and you find out who's responsible, and you follow the chain up, and you follow it as far as you can go. And everyone you pass through, you establish their responsibility for the crimes.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I am switching to going back to RIA Novosti and the words that are being used like denazification, which shows the way towards getting rid of the people, eliminating the people, or yes, re-educate them. And somebody who obviously is working on that topic, Talita Diaz, is asking whether this might be the use of a coded language as like with the Hutus against the Tutsi in Rwanda was being used. And again, this would be a strong sign that this is not only headed towards re-education, but denazification is the coded language for kill them, which is what we have seen in Mariupol has been done, also including, by the way, the filtration, not camps, but the filtration system, which has been set up within the city, where, from what I hear and understand, Kadyrovskis, but other Russian soldiers also are going from door to door, tearing out the men and or women and civilians and killing them. So, Wayne, you are internationally on your way. So the Hutsi and Huti and Tutsi and Rwanda, I don't know whether you were engaged in it.
I was on several occasions, as I think Alexandra said from the outset, we can't expect to find. Let's say this is assume for a moment this is genocide. Genocidal campaigns rarely have, or certainly not in my experience, rarely have. Please destroy all of that race, or please destroy all. Leaders don't make those comments, even in the most blatant circumstances like the Rwandan genocide. It's a process of dehumanizing. It's a process of referring to the Tutsis as cockroaches. It's a process of dismissing them as people. It's a process of talking about controlling them. And it's within this complexity lies the central intent, which is ultimately, in the Rwandan case, an intent to destroy. And what I would say about the Ukrainian, what makes me, what raises my alert systems at least, is this escalation from we're coming to Ukraine to denazify. And none of us were under any doubt that that meant kill President Zelensky and the government and impose a puppet government. And where we've gone to now in the latest comments coming out of the Kremlin is denazify now means denazify the whole population. So if the Kremlin meant killing 5, 6, 7 weeks ago when applied to the government, what does he mean now when applied to the whole population? And so I think the simple answer to me is that that seems to me like the type of, to be honest, when I read that piece by the press agency, I think it was one of the most chilling statements I've seen. And like I say, I worked for many years on the Rwandan genocide. It was as chilling, if not more so, than any comment I read in the Rwandan genocide. And that certainly made me think there's something here going on, and it's not just crimes against humanity.
Alexander, go ahead.
I think that we can draw parallels between genocide in Rwanda and what's going on in Ukraine. For example, the member of Russian Duma, the so-called parliament, Borodai, he compared in one of his speeches Ukrainians to cockroaches who should be destroyed. So even in such details, we can see some parallels. Regarding the article in RIA Novosti, to me, it's open call to commit genocide against Ukrainians. It's obvious. And this article was published on a state resource, information resource. And there was no denial, there was no punishment for the author, even though if we take Russian criminal code, there is supposed to be punishment for such calls. And there was no reaction, which is a proof that it was blessed maybe by Putin himself, taking into consideration the hierarchy, strong hierarchy in Russian political structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, Sylvia Stöber, she's working for the ARD first. She is asking about the children again. I think indeed this has not been talked about yet in Germany. So our debate is really bringing about a new aspect. She's asking that Putin has been talking about the very disturbing demographic development in Russia, which we all know that that country is having a lack of children, probably because of a lack of optimism in the society. And she wants to know whether those deportations could really be, and it's almost too cynical to even ask that, I feel shivering, whether this could be a trying to bring about and change the demographic situation dilemma which Russia is in.
I'll give that a shot, Marie. Look, we know that Putin cares about Russian demographics. There have been multiple efforts to try and increase fertility in Russia. I'm not sure that the taking of children is done for that purpose, but it's being done for reasons of establishing Russian control in Ukraine. And it might have the auxiliary purpose of helping improve demographics in Russia.
Yeah. Maybe in this point, I remember going back 25 years when we learned about the systematic misuse, sexual abuse of women in those so-called hotels. And we learned, of course, that it was not about sexuality, but that it was about humiliation of the Bosnian men who could not protect their women. This one was one of the main motives of what has happened there, and what we learned and still waited very, very long until we intervened and reacted. And maybe this separating parents and children also is in part this humiliating. Can you imagine a mother or a father not being able to protect their children from being torn away due to a deportation? This is one of the most horrible fantasies you can have if you have children yourself, or even if you have no children. So maybe it is all of this is part of this destruction of the psychological state of the people which they are in, running out of money to get every day's life somehow going, even if you are in the so-called safe western part of the country. But like in cities in Mariupol, Kharkiv, and Dnipro, where things have started, just being put into a psychological situation where maybe you asked yourself, was it worth it? And I was being told by one of those journalists who is looking so carefully at the ground in Mariupol, who says there is now little tiny chat groups and they start asking each other, was it worth it? And of course, if the atrocities and the offensive of the Russian military goes on, and they are heading for Kharkiv and they are heading for big cities like Dnipro and maybe Odessa. If I look at Zelensky and the government and you people, Alexander, those decisions to take, we go on fighting, although our equipment is not as good as the Russian equipment is, they have more resources. What a responsibility which you have to live with. And maybe I will add one more question, which doesn't have so much to do with our debate now, but I think it is necessary that we talk about it. This is the debate about no-fly zone. It was being asked here. I will be very open, and when our Ukrainian team members at the very beginning of the war started campaigning for a no-fly zone, we said, you guys, that means drawing NATO in. And this is a huge step politically. Once in a while, if I look at those unbelievable, this miserable of the people, I ask myself whether it is not a obligation, international obligation, due to this unbelievable brutality and misery of the people, of civilians, to close the sky. John, what about that debate in the States?
It's clear that the ongoing brutal Russian campaign has changed minds in Washington on the need for a more robust American response. And while I have to say that we lost the no-fly zone debate, and those of us who are asking for something a little bit less ambitious, like a humanitarian air corridor, have not succeeded politically, support for that, especially in Congress, has grown substantially as a result of the Russian atrocities. So I don't rule out the possibility that some point down the road, 4 weeks, 6 weeks from now, we could see, at a minimum, the humanitarian air corridor. If, for example, the reports about possible Russian use of chemical warfare in Mariupol prove to be true, the administration is going to be under great pressure to take some strong steps, which they promised already. And this could be one of them.
Okay.
But let me make, can I make just one more point? I'm a little bit leery about a no-fly zone as the US military normally does it, because that would require us to take out Russian anti-aircraft installations. So we would have to kill Russians to start it. Whereas the humanitarian air corridor means you send our planes in, you send the planes with humanitarian shipments in, and they're accompanied by military planes, which do not need to shoot at Russians, at least not unless they're shot at. And that's a very big distinction.
Okay. Number one, we had not talked about it yet, but you just mentioned it. There is, I would say, signs that maybe phosphor chemical weapons have been used in Mariupol. The big problem is that no international observer, no journalist is in the city anymore, and we cannot verify that information. But we definitely should be watching what more information we get about this possibility, which has been claimed and pronounced today. Then, John, I would, since you made this distinction about the humanitarian corridor instead of a no-fly zone, again, my political life, I would say, started with the protection zone of UN protection zones in Srebrenica, Jepa, I forgot the third enclave. Kofi Annan announced it, being the General Secretary of the United Nations. And then he did not find any nation which was willing to provide soldiers. That was the reason why in the end, the Netherlands said, okay, we will offer 600, and which were not enough when the Mladic offensive started, and those guys were being afraid, and they called for air support. The planes in Sicily took off. They flew and were over the sky of Potocari, which was this place where the UN troops were being stationed. And then the French were afraid about their French blue helmet soldiers in Jepa, which was the second enclave, and made the airplanes turn around and fly back to Sicily again. This is the story of Srebrenica. So if you talk about humanitarian corridors, and you made a distinction, you said they would not have to shoot at Russian soldiers, but what would happen if Russian airplanes would attack those who try to protect or to open this corridor?
I should mention that this concept was developed by Phil Breedlove, the former SACEUR, and Kurt Volker. I merely support it. But I support it strongly. And I was asked that question in numerous debates. And the answer is very simple. If Moscow is going to shoot at us for delivering humanitarian aid, we shoot back. And we shoot back to win. Okay. The point is, I don't think, and this is obviously not certain, but I don't think they would shoot. We delivered humanitarian aid by Navy ships into Georgia while Moscow was conducting its war of aggression there in 2008. I also think we sent in US planes to take out American citizens from Georgia during that war. We've done neither in this, I think, to the discredit of the Biden administration.
Okay, John. I think the West, since we are not Orthodox, we are now unfortunately going into our Easter holidays. It's not a good time for parliamentarians and government to go on holidays, and we all know that there is strong preparations for a Russian offensive in the East. I'm unfortunately expecting terrible pictures, a lot of suffering, maybe setbacks for the Ukrainian army in the upcoming week. Again, I hope that we, being the West, understand if Putin manages to kill the Ukrainian people and to wipe out and destroy the state, he will have wiped out part of the West, because then we should not talk about a politics of values which is based on values anymore. So I hope that our politics won't be too slow, too late. We will try, I would not say pushing them, but giving them arguments, because it also is about us, about the West. And I think many of us have not understood it. They still think we can encircle the crimes and the misery on Ukrainian soil, and rather do not think that somebody else will be or might be next. So thank you all for this debate. It is not about gaining a triumph, this genocide term. Crimes against humanity are terrible enough. The question is whether politics and the public understands what is at stake and are willing to act according to the necessities. I think this is why we have to stick to this debate, not only about war crimes, crimes against humanity, but also keeping our eye on the Genocide Convention, because I am convinced it would demand more from our side to do more than we are doing at the moment. Thank you all. Keep safe, you guys in Kiev. Yeah, we try to be with you.
Thank you.
Try to be with the Ukrainian people. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good
Thank you.
event.